Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Linda Blossbaum, and I am the Senior Director of Artist and Industry Relations at Sound Exchange, headquartered in DC. Spend a lot of time here in Nashville, so it's great to see a lot of friendly faces in the room. I just want to take a few minutes and introduce our team that is all down from DC for the day and talk a little bit about why we're here, and then we can kind of get started with a somewhat informal presentation. The cameras look very serious, but rest assured, this is really just for our own kind of training prosperity. We wanted our team in DC to kind of get a sense of the types of questions that people might have about the MMA and about letters of direction and other things that might come up today. So we're really producing it for our own purposes. You won't be on the 6 o'clock news tonight, I promise. So that's the mics, but we aren't mic'd in the room. So if at any point you can't hear, just please put your hand up and we can talk louder. This is Taylor Gerber, who is, I'm sure, probably has been on the phone with many of you over the years from our account services department, is really kind of our biggest brain. I get a lot of credit for solving a lot of problems, but the truth is I just kind of forward them to Taylor, and he and his wonderful team of about 40 folks up in DC take care of all that. So Taylor's going to get into a lot of our operations questions today, and I'm sure we'll hopefully be able to help you with what might be going on today and what is coming down the road from the MMA. Standing in the back of the room is our Chief Development Officer, Richard Conlin, who is working on a lot of great projects and business strategy for Sound Exchange. Headquartered in DC, lives in Connecticut, spends more time on American Airlines, kind of traveling the country on behalf of Sound Exchange and the Sound Exchange companies. And we can talk a little bit about that as it goes on too, but we're really honored to have Richard here in Nashville today. Our General Counsel, Colin Rushing, is here in the front. Colin was based in DC until last summer, and then he got the Nashville bug that has hit many of us and actually took the plunge and moved his family here over the summer. So we're thrilled that we have such a great legal mind here in such a great music center. And the woman who needs no introduction is Alicia Warwick, who runs the Recording Academy's office of the Grammys and the Recording Academy, and she runs the Nashville office here in town and works very closely with the team in Washington and the P&E wing all over the country, and we're really pleased to partner today with NARIS and the Recording Academy, and we're so thrilled to have a little bit of a success story. We could take one more victory lap on the MMA together. So we have a really informal presentation, and I'm kind of going to call on folks to go through kind of how we got here and whatnot. But Alicia, do you want to say a few words about the P&E wing and what brought the MMA to become a reality?
Hear me? I'll try to speak loud. I'm good at fast talking, but I'm not good at speaking loud and projecting, obviously. But thank you guys, and we're absolutely thrilled to be here. The Recording Academy, as hopefully a lot of you know, we work tirelessly in regard to our advocacy efforts. We always say this: we're really uniquely charged to wrap our arms around all genres and all professions. And so, whether it be working on something for songwriters or producers and engineers or creators at large, we really want to make sure that it's helping everyone as a whole. So in regard to specifically the AMP Act, and we were working, our producers and engineers wing that we have, that's a wing of the Academy, has created things such as the deliverables documents and worked on many initiatives. And this was something that we discussed with our producers and engineers well before it was written into legislation. So to see it happen and in partnership with Sound Exchange, and once we created the AMP Act and really trying to standardize these letter of directions in the process, it felt like we were getting some momentum. And it was part of our Fair Play, Fair Pay Act in regard to inclusions of the Performing Rights Act and the AMP Act. And so, as you guys know, you go to Congress and the conversation is that there's so many different angles, so many different companies and organizations coming at the senators and Congress. And so it made a lot of sense for us to wrap this into the MMA. And to see that this is the first time that producers are written into copyright law, to see that producers are going to have a reliable income stream and it's going to be set and fixed is thrilling. So I'm just here on behalf of the Academy to say thank you, and we're thrilled. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to the Nashville office. If we don't have the answers, we have an amazing DC office, Daryl Freeman and Todd Dupler and others there. And again, thank you for having us, and we'll be here if you have any questions. So
thank you, Alicia. And just really punctuating everything Alicia said about the cooperative spirit that went into this bill. I've lived in Washington. I've served my whole career in politics, working on Capitol Hill and around Capitol Hill. And I have to say, I have never seen any effort that really had the cooperative spirit that the MMA had. And I know it's been said before, and it does sound a little bit like we're patting ourselves on the back, but it was really amazing to see it all come together. I mean, this is, you mentioned the fair play, fair pay. There's been lots of legislation over the last basically 6 years of this cycle, with the chairman Goodlatte in the House saying that he wanted to modernize a lot of the music licensing issues. So everybody kind of raised their hand and talked about, the pieces that they wanted, whether it was producers and engineers on the AMP or the pre-72 Classics Act, about getting that law written on the federal level. Certainly Title I of the bill, which talks about songwriters and publishers and how that licensing is going to be handled in the future, was a big part of the debate. I'm sure you've seen all over social media and heard from Washington, and many of you were very poignant and vocal and helpful in getting all of those problems solved throughout the way. So everybody had a little bit of skin in the game, and that made for a cooperative effort within the music industry to actually get something done. I mean, members of Congress really had the right approach in wanting to do the right thing, but basically said, look, music industry, if you can't get along with each other and figure this out on your own, how you're all going to work together in the future, we can't help you. And I should say, too, the tech industry was part of that discussion as well, and everybody kind of came to sit down at the table on the first day with, their parochial interest in mind, but as the process moved forward, that spirit really carried to have everybody really benefit in the end. So we'll talk a little bit about the different pieces of the bill, but we wanted to focus specifically in this group on the AMP Act, where where NARIS and the Recording Academy really heard from the P&E wing and brought a lot of these issues to the forefront of the debate. And that really, I do know that helped drive the success of the bill, to actually have the stakeholders, the creators, for themselves, making those points. So this is just kind of a basic agenda of what we wanted to keep in mind as we move through the process, and certainly save a lot of time for questions. And also, if questions come up throughout, please raise your hand and interrupt. We want this to be a conversation and not I teach a college class, and I very much always encourage people to please interrupt me because they must get sick of being talked at. So this is kind of our basic agenda of what we want to go through and really get to the MMA piece, because we know that will change a lot of the questions at the end. So the MMA, the Music Modernization Act, as we said, was born out of a lot of slivers of legislation that different parts of the music industry and tech industry were taking to Capitol Hill. And they basically were based on the premise that people that make music and create music and write music and produce music and sing and play instruments deserve to be paid more fairly across the board. And that the services should play by the same rules and in a very transparent and efficient way. And Sound Exchange has always kind of prided ourselves on being very transparent and efficient in the way that we do business with our statements and our processes. We have forever honored letters of direction when artists want to share their portion of the royalties with producers and engineers and creative participants from the process. That was not because the law told us to do so until a couple of months ago. It was because we knew it was the right thing to do. But there was the question, and it was brought to us from the producers and engineers, that there may be a time where somebody else may be doing this down the road, or there might be a different leadership structure, or somebody might decide down the road that process would not be in place. And that is why it is now cemented in federal law that producers will always have the right to receive royalties through a letter of direction. So the MMA is very good news for that piece. Back in 1995, which is when Sound Exchange started, this is when we decided that the letters of direction would be a piece of that, like I said. Taylor, why don't you talk a little bit about how many letters of direction we get and how your department kind of processes them and how it works?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Linda. Sure. So as Linda mentioned, I'm in the Account Services Department. My title is Senior Manager of Account Management and Artist Rights. And we're the department within Sound Exchange that receive and process the letters of direction. The numbers have been increasing over time of letters of direction submitted. Now we receive probably 4,000 to 4,500 per year, I'd say. So, 1,000 per quarter, you could say. And the department's a team of about 40 plus folks. Not all of those team members actually work with letters of direction, but the account management team at Sound Exchange is responsible for processing and inputting the information from letters of direction into our system. That's a team of about 10 people. So it's, it's of course a very important part of what we do, and we are constantly allocating our resources to processing those letters of direction, making sure that the producers, engineers, and mixers are getting paid when the document's submitted.
What's the turnaround time when a letter of direction gets submitted?
Yeah, we shoot for about 30 days from submission to input and being finally processed. It can change a bit, but the target is about 30 days.
It's very important, and I always try to tell producers and folks that run studios down here, the most efficient way for us to receive a letter of direction if it's done as part of the initial paperwork. So before you turn on the board, when the artist walks in and everybody's feeling great about the upcoming album and how wonderful it's going to be, to get that letter of direction signed at the forefront, because then, once the track does start getting play and people haven't moved around, but when you're all in the same room, it's really easy to get that done. So I really do encourage, and to the extent you are producers or have clients that are producers, to get that initial paperwork, get the sound exchange paperwork done initially for producers at the forefront. That does help a great deal down the road, because as you can imagine, and I'm sure some of you might have dealt with, it's sometimes hard to find that artist or to have them agree, or if there was a collaboration and a bunch of people were in the room at the same time, it does require that everybody who was part of the collaboration signs off on the letter of direction. So always easier to do it on the front end moving forward. One thing that the MMA tries to correct, of course, is kind of going backwards when we are trying to get those royalties paid for creators of things that have already been recorded. And as Taylor said, we get about 4,000 letters of directions a year, and over the years we've paid out tens of millions of dollars to producers through those letters of direction. So it's real money. It's not rounding errors. It's not small change. It is serious. It's really intended to replace kind of the old point system for those who were making music back in the good old days. One thing, now that AMP has been codified, our process has a few new features that everybody should be aware of moving forward. And Taylor is the expert on kind of, and many of you in this room obviously have become familiar with the process and how to get a letter of direction filed. There's a packet that explains everything well, but this will become even more important in the post-MMA world, because now, like we said, it's codified into law. So we really hope that more producers are taking advantage of these benefits.
Does this replace the old LODs, or do they have to be done again?
This form is still the form of choice and still what you want to do. It is a relatively new form. This one's been around a couple of years. How long has this one been around? But this is still kind of the primary way about going.
You've done one before, then you have to do it again.
No.
Let's say you did one 5 years ago.
If it's already been done, submitted, input into our system, no need to redo it.
Yes,
Sorry,
Marshall.
no, no, no.
That's okay. This is Marshall.
Hey. So, with regard to sort of, the sort of not to make light of getting an LOD done at the beginning of the session, but that's virtually impossible. Are you partnering with any of the, there's a sound credit, I think is Naris working on a track-based metadata. Are you guys interfacing, or you have any plans to interface with that? Because that's really the easiest way for us to sort of ensure that we're credited as producers and engineers and even as players on a session, is to sort of put it in the metadata while the music's being created. Is that something that you guys, I know there are several competing apps. Are you, is that something you guys are in talks about? Are you in development of your own?
Absolutely, it is something. If we had to have it's always, we take our victory lap on the MMA, and then we have our list of things that still need to be done, and that is certainly at the top of that list of things. Well, I'm going to put that second on the list at Sound Exchange, but it's on that list of important remaining items that absolutely need to be done. We've been working on getting that metadata into place. I know the Recording Academy has as well. Maybe you can speak to what the PNA Wing specifically has been doing.
Different mediums to use, but Soundways is one that we've
Soundways.
recommended, and I believe there's a letter of direction component in there. I would have to ask Gabri Waddell, who's is his company, and so I could talk to you more about that, Marshall. If
That'd be
anyone
great.
has questions, we can answer some more of those. But it's in the process and in the works, and like you said, having that all focused on one main, server. Exactly, it makes it immensely important.
A good recommendation for everybody is Sound Credit.
Yes.
Yeah, Sound Credit. It's an app that you can just put in the metadata on your session. It's there. It can't be taken out.
And to the extent, that's a really excellent point. I mean, data is really, it's kind of the uninteresting part of, we want to make great sounding music and have, great relationships and data. We often liken it to kind of the oil in a car. Like, it's kind of not the exciting part of the car, but if the oil is bad, then the car is not going to run. So we all recognize that having, good data and better data and having data speak to each other. And Richard Conlon is really the expert on kind of, these new ways to share and transmit and collaborate all that data together. He's worked a lot with our operations department to make sure that we're trying to streamline all of those data processes as best as we can. So absolutely, data is going to be critical for all of these pieces to work. And Richard, maybe that's probably a good segue to talk a little bit about Title I of the bill, which establishes the Music Licensing Collective, the MLC, which will do this for songwriting and publishing data. But we just wanted, while we're here to talk about AMP, we also just wanted to recognize, like I said, Title I of this bill got a lot of attention, particularly from the data services and from some of the PRO interests along the way. So Richard's really kind of the expert in kind of what Title I did and where it's going and what we need to do moving forward. Boom!
Thanks again, everyone, for being here. Yeah, I think that the bill itself is indicative of a move in the industry of trying to have solutions that are less patchworked. The bill brings together mechanical rights on behalf of music publishers with rights for producers, codifying producers' rights, taking care of some of the holes, not nearly all of them, in our current regulatory system about pre-72 and so forth. And it really kind of is something that we've been doing at Sound Exchange too, in terms of saying, it's not a producer is here on this island and a songwriter's on this island and a publisher's on this island and a artist is on this one. When you look at it, and we look at our artists, many of our artists are songwriters and they're publishers, and that led us, before this bill sort of came together, less than a year ago. It was right after the holidays last year that we were all herding the cats to try to put this agenda together. But it was one of the trends that drove us to get into music publishing with the acquisition of CMRA and start to think about shared data assets and think about how publishing data and sound recording data should live together, starting to think about things that our colleagues on our operations team have done, putting out ISRCs and putting good data into the marketplace and not thinking that data is the moat around the castle and it's your way to stay in the business. It's actually, to what Linda was saying, good data and comprehensive data and good processes are better for everyone, and it eliminates errors and it eliminates ambiguity. So we've been working really hard on the legislative front, certainly with everyone else in the business, but also as a commercial entity, working hard to bring together different data feeds and get data out into the marketplace and fix data on behalf of our licensees. I know in our licensing department, we'll go back and say, oh my gosh, you reported this song this way. Well, attach this ISRC to it and let me correct it for you so next time it comes through, it's going to be identified properly and for everyone in this room. And then if there is an LOD in place, everything's going to make its way through. So I think this is a really important deep dive into AMP, but it's part of a bigger and I think very encouraging picture going forward where we have authoritative data that isn't subjective, that's vetted and blessed by the owners of the data and the owners of the assets, that it flows into a system where we can try stuff like this, like the LOD process. That was a commercial venture that then became codified. So I think it's all part of a movement forward. I mean, we're in a deep dive for producers, which is appropriate for this room, but it's part, I think, of a very encouraging trend going forward for us.
I really hope so. Yes, the ISRCs are kind of the currency. So always making sure that, in some songs, they have like 30 ISRCs that can be attached to them if they have a live version or a dance version. And so it's really important that we're counting everything correctly. And that's kind of the language that gets used. Mm-hmm. Any other questions on data or? Yes, Marshall.
Is the ISNI number going to be, that's something that Cabre is big on, the ISNI number for us as creators. Is that anything that's, I'm always trying to be an advocate for you guys, so I'm trying to turn people onto the earlier technology and the earlier, that ISNI number, I had no idea about it. Right. Is that something that's going to be incorporated into this going forward, or is that just a?
That's a good question. I don't have a good question. It's like I said, it's something we can talk more about, but I don't know 100% on that.
All right, no more questions from me.
No, that's why you're here. So this is the letter of direction packet. Most of you are probably familiar with it. Don't need to redo it if you've already done the old one, but this will still be kind of the first and foremost tool that you have moving forward for getting producers and engineers paid. Once you have the LOD packet, Taylor, you want to walk them through the process a little bit about what happens when it comes into our office? And
Sure.
I mentioned the 30-day-ish turnaround.
Yeah.
But the most critical point to remember, and this is going to be central kind of throughout everything today, is that relationship with the artist. So statutorily, it is the artist and the rights owners that Sound Exchange is primarily responsible under federal law for paying. So having that relationship with the artist, for the artist share of that money to be shared with the creative participants, is really first and foremost and central. So knowing where that artist is, making sure that artist is registered for Sound Exchange, making sure that relationship is fresh, is going to be kind of the critical component for us to be able to process any LOD.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, do you want to just go back one
Sure.
slide to?
How we got here? Here we go. Go to the website, letter of direction. Okay.
So yeah, so some of these forms might look familiar to folks in this room. On the left, essentially, bottom left, we have just the page from our website, which is one way to get access to the letter of direction packet. That's certainly a great way to download it, and in that packet you'll have the guide, which is this middle image here. That's a really great resource. It kind of has like I think it answers most questions that folks may have when filling out and submitting a letter of direction. In addition to the guide, there's the actual letter of direction itself, which has some key fields that we ask for, such as artist name, payee name of the producer, effective date that we should be applying the letter of direction within our system, whether it's retroactive or forward going only or as of a specific date. Some other pieces of information that we try to capture there as well. Also, what's not pictured here is the repertoire chart. That's really critical for us. It specifies which recordings are in question, the percentage that we should be applying to divert to the producer, mixer, or engineer. The effective date can be input there if it's a different effective date for different recordings, for example. Also, in addition to the website, Sound Exchange Direct is a really good resource that we launched not very recently, but not too long ago either. It's basically the portal where you can log into your account through Sound Exchange, and you can see information about past payments. You can download the letter of direction information there. You can submit new letters of direction. You can see which tracks are currently being credited to your account. So it's a really great resource. Speaking of the ISRC as well, it has a link to the ISRC search page, which is really helpful. You can kind of see the metadata of certain recordings we have in our repertoire database. So yeah, Sound Exchange Direct, I can't stress that one enough. It's a really great resource. I think it answers a lot of questions that folks come to us with. So it's for anyone who doesn't have access yet, definitely encourage looking into Sound Exchange Direct.
And the ISRC search is available to everybody. You don't have to be in your Sound Exchange Direct account or have to be, and actually it's free. It's really a way of kind of enabling this commerce, these ISRC codes to be out there and to people to be able to look up whatever track they're searching for, want more information on. Like I said, some of them have several ISRC codes for one track in different versions. It's a great tool, and we're really, again, trying to simplify a lot of these processes that are very data-based. Yes?
Okay, for an idiot like myself who has a decade of music out there and hundreds of tracks that I don't have a letter of direction for. Where do I even begin? I look at this sometimes and I just go, I'm just going to give up, because the truckload of artists that I've worked with that I'm not getting paid on, sometimes it's weird to even go back and ask them to sign a letter of direction. So does the MMA legally make it possible for me to actually sign these letters of directions without them, or how does it work? Excuse my ignorance.
Specific to that question, the MMA would only legally change your standing with the artist if you recorded before 1995.
Okay.
So I'm taking a good look at you and thinking maybe you didn't record before 1995, but
I did, but
maybe not the bulk of all
right.
that truckload of
last
stuff.
10 years, really. I mean, I don't even know where to start, to be quite honest. I'm thankful to receive my Sound Exchange money, but there is a truckload that is not even registered.
Sure.
I'll let
That's
Taylor
out
answer that. I mean,
Yeah,
if you
I
start
think-
with the search.
I think maybe a great place to start would be the ISRC search feature on our website and through Sound Exchange Direct. It's at least a good place to start to identify the tracks that we have in our system that you would intend to pursue being credited for.
What does that mean, intend to pursue? What does that mean?
Well, that you would submit a letter of direction to Sound Exchange to be paid for.
Gotcha.
Um,
Do I
Or
have to
approach
go
the
back
artist.
to
You have to go back to the
approach
artist.
the artist.
I was going to say that might, yeah. So we would need to get a signature from the artist or artists. So that could be a challenge to go, get that letter of direction signed.
I'll talk to you later.
But as far as just identifying the recordings, the ISRC search, I think you'll find to be very helpful in that regard.
Because sometimes, to be quite honest, like to your point you had earlier, that in the session, that signing document just doesn't happen in that vibe. It just doesn't
Yeah.
happen. And to go back now, it's almost like I'd have to give up on the retroactive thing to keep relationships.
A lot of those artists aren't registered at Sound Exchange, and if you go to them and say, hey,
I
these
know.
tracks aren't registered, why don't we register them? It's not about a pouring faucet, it's about the cup getting.
No,
filled.
Well,
You
and
know,
in that point, I mean, there's a way that I think that many people in this room might be able to be helpful. If the artist is not registered, you certainly have a much deeper relationship with them than we do sitting in our desks in Washington, D.C. So, kind of say, hey, look, let's all register together and make
I
sure.
think the big trouble for me is the ones that are registered
Yeah.
and are already cashed a lot of checks.
Yeah, that
So I'm trying to figure that one out, but that's okay.
that is, yeah, we do not have a psychologist on
No, I
site
get
at
it.
Sound Exchange. Sometimes I wish we
get
did.
it. I think it's about going forward now.
To help that the human relationship is tough. So that's why I say, particularly to new producers, this certainly becomes a big deal in the EDM world, which I know is hitting Nashville a little more than it used to. But there's a lot of collaborators, a lot going on in that room. Trying to get that stuff done on the front end and getting the metadata in place that we can credit everybody appropriately is important. It's not a perfect system, and again, it is kind of going. And sometimes they're dead, or you can't go back to the artist anymore. But we want to make at least identify what you believe you're entitled to be paid for, and make it as easy for you to present them with that information as possible. Anything else before we move on letters of direction? Yeah, Pat.
Just to be real clear then, on a go-forward basis, you still have to get an LOD from everybody.
That's exactly right.
And it's not gonna be a part of your your production agreement,
But
is it?
I was just gonna say, you
Usually
can make it part of the,
incorporated
as
incorporated into the
exhibit.
production agreement,
Okay.
that the LOD needs,
yeah,
has
the
to
LOD
be
has to be.
So
instead of the
that's
point
the only
system.
thing that compels the artist to do it.
Correct.
Well, or your relationship. Yeah.
And
Yes.
the artist can cancel it anytime he wants to.
That is correct. Yes, it is the artist's share of the money. And this is not a how-to, although we do have how-to sessions. We'll come to your office. We've come to some of the offices of folks that are in here on how to fill out a lot of these forms. But keep in mind that this is the artist's share of every dollar that's getting paid. So when you're calculating kind of, if you're trying to transfer kind of the old system into a new system, the old point system into a new system, you want to remember that you're dealing with 50% of the money, actually 45% of the money. So, if you wanted to get a former 10 points, you got to do that, 20% of the artist's share. I'm not a mathematician, but just something to keep in mind that you were talking about. It is the artist's money. It is the artist's share of the money, and they can change their mind at any time. I don't have a lot of data on how many artists change their minds. I hope it's not too many,
It's
but
pretty low in
Yeah.
my experience.
But if it's, well, I guess, this is a question for a lawyer, but I would always assume that if it's in the production agreement that the artist has to assign to you in perpetuity their share, it's in the contract. They've signed a production agreement that is a binding contract that says,
That's a really good point, and our general counsel is sitting here, but I would go on to say is we don't, at Sound Exchange, we don't interpret outside contracts. We only have, this is kind of our legal document by which we establish how you're getting your Sound Exchange money, for obvious reasons. I mean, people can bring in, napkins from every place around the country and say that this supersedes that contract, and so we don't really, but you're right, if you have a good lawyer and you have a good contract, you should be fine with the artist on your end, but we can really only interpret this as the legal documents.
So
Yes.
if one of these
Richard?
gentlemen turn in a letter of direction that basically says they get the royalties in perpetuity, and you get a letter from your artist saying, I'm revoking this, where do you side with it?
yeah,
We would recognize the artist revoking it and discontinue or put aside the letter of direction.
It's actually a separate agreement. It's not part of the production agreement.
Yeah, Sound Exchange would not be part of that. We could not interpret that other agreement as superseding a letter of direction. At that point, and I am a lawyer, but I don't practice law on these terms, but you would have the recourse of going and suing the artist. Yeah, exactly. Matt, you had a question?
Letter direction apply to groups of works, albums, or do you need one for each song?
It's track-based.
And if it gets released multiple times, do you need one for each time it gets released?
Yeah, I mean, for every, I guess, unique recording, when we receive the letter of direction, we would apply it to, either the original version. If it was released on a soundtrack or compilation, we would apply the letter of direction to that too. As much as you could provide release information and ISRCs to help us identify that we're applying the letter of direction to the right recordings within our system, that would be very helpful. But we would apply it to all re-releases if it's the same recording.
These repertoire sheets, in keeping with what Richard was saying about data and how data is so central, really kind of changed and enhanced our system so much since we started using repertoire sheets submitted by the actual rights owners, because what was recorded when you have the best information. We will rely on information that the services provide to us. So if SiriusXM gives us their logs every month, that is good information, but we find that the best information, and we can operate much more efficiently when the repertoire is submitted from the rights owner. So that's why those repertoire sheets become really important. Anybody else before we good? It's so easy. Just speaking candidly, we recognize this is not the simplest, checkbox way to go about it. It's the music industry. Why make it simple when you can make it really difficult? But we are trying to simplify that, by answering folks, by answering the questions, and as we move forward with the MMA, by making it at least the criteria by which you can move forward as clear as possible. But it's complicated. ISRC is not something that rolls off the tongue and at your Thanksgiving dinner conversation. So we understand that you have to have a little bit of a business mind for this too. So we talked a little bit about when an LOD comes into our office. One point about the MMA, and I think we asked about the difference between the MMA and before, that's really critical, and I just wanted to take a pause for a moment to talk about, is the tax structure. And based on, and I'm sure Alicia can echo this, on what we've heard from a lot of producers and engineers over the years, is how the taxation was handled at the end of the year, and how Sound Exchange provides that tax information for, again, the artist money that is directed to a producer. The MMA has clarified that starting in 2020, those tax components will go directly to the producer. So we will 1099 the producer directly on their portion. We heard folks that came to us and said, this is complicated. I have to go back to the artist again and get a W-9, and now I've got to bother them again, and they don't really want to keep dealing with me on tax issues. So this is really to simplify that paperwork. So starting in the spring of 2021 for the tax year 2020, that will be something that producers will be automatically directly. So hopefully that makes your IRS filing a little bit easier in April of 2021. So that was definitely something that came out of the MMA. I'd say kind of the Recording Academy and Sound Exchange in particular kind of brought this arcane issue to the Congress. It wasn't something that they had necessarily been focused on, but we recognized on an accounting basis that's really important. So good news coming in just a little bit of time. And as we've already said, this is not a new right. You're not it for producers. There's still that critical relationship with the artist that needs to be recognized through the letter of direction process. So just want to clarify that. Again, it is the first time in history that producers have been mentioned in legislation, and that is a tremendous step forward, and we're all really excited about that. But it's still based on the initial construct where it's an artist and a rights owner that are being paid by Sound Exchange. Anything you want to add there on LOD to receive payments?
No, yeah, I think this might be a good time to talk about the change of if for pre-1995 recordings, if a producer, mixer, engineer is not able to get a signature from the artist, this is a new feature of the AMP Act. There's a process Sound Exchange will be administering where if it's a pre-1995 recording and a producer, mixer, engineer is unable to get a traditional letter of direction signed by the artist, I think it's over a course of 120 days, 4 months or so, the producer can then contact Sound Exchange, where Sound Exchange will try a similar process to reach the artist for about 120 days or so. And if that is unsuccessful, we would be able to apply a default percentage of 2%, I believe, to the producer. Still could be revoked by the artist, but that's a pretty significant change that doesn't exist currently.
So for your pre-95 work that you're asking about, and you can't find the artist, it's too much trouble, you could pursue this process where you certify to us that you've tried to reach them for 4 months, and then we'll try to reach them for 4 months. And if after all of that we can't get the artist's attention to get that thing signed, you'll get a default 2%. So it's not a guaranteed 2%. You still have to do the homework. You still have to, let us help you do some of that homework. But if at the end of all of that you can't locate the artist and we can't get an answer, that default 2% would then go moving forward from that date.
Sorry, I know I'm breaking my 10-minute rule.
All right, Marshall.
Is there a way, I'm just thinking about his situation and my situation. Say we go back and we look at all these recordings we've made. There may be, there's a point at which whatever the ISRC code, whatever that song is, it's not really generating enough income, no matter how big it was during the time. It's not really generating enough income for the 2% that potentially he could get from Sound Exchange is worth the effort. Is there a way? I'm guessing there isn't a way to sort of see the overall earnings of a particular album. What Sound Exchange
Since
is,
inception.
since inception, or more importantly, 24 months prior, just to say, oh well, this thing's earned $50 in the last 2 years. It's not going to be worth going after potentially 2% or shaking a tree to find the artist. It could take 50 hours to make $4 a year. You know what I mean? Is there a way to do that? Is that something that we as producers would have rights to inquire about?
That's a fair point.
Yeah, so to that I would say we can certainly look into gathering that information within our system. Just as a heads up though, we would have to, since it's probably paid to the artist, we would have to get their verification to share any amounts, just for account security purposes. But we do have the information on file and we'd be happy to share it. It's just we would have to get that cleared with the who it's paid to.
We come up with a secret code. In the
A secret handshake.
Like if you say grapefruit, it means don't bother. If you say apple, it means bother.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess there isn't, but okay.
I mean, and again, and it sounds maybe a little simplistic and Candylandish, but again, that relationship with the artist, if you have, a good terms with them and they're still around or reachable to call and say, hey, is it worth my while to go through this? And, that's part of that 4-month process. But we can be as helpful as we can. But just to echo what Taylor said, and this is true today and has been true since we started, there are confidentiality considerations that we have to take on everybody's account. And I see some of the bigger firms here in the room, certainly know that if you're the authorized user on an account, we can share that information with whoever the artist dictates we're allowed to share it with, but we can't, share it with somebody's, ex-wife or somebody else who might be calling and wanting that information. It's really for the protection of the artist. So getting, listed as the authorized agent on those accounts always makes things easier. Again, front-end work. Yes, and then I know Richard has a question too.
The pre-95 recordings, if you can't find the artist, that 2%, is it retroactive or?
It's prospective. So it would be prospective to be applied, and also if it were to be revoked, prospective as well.
That kind of gets to Marshall's point. Is how much is it being played? Is it worth $4 to me, or is it $400,000? So it's moving forward only though, not looking back. Go ahead, Richard. I'm sorry.
Yeah, with the large amount of aggregation that's occurring today, especially with respect to production rights and artist rights, what happens when an artist sells those rights to a particular record label or another entity, and they accrue all the rights under that artist actually owns? Does Sound Exchange actually take that letter of direction and say, okay, now this new entity, this record label, gets all Sound Exchange royalties that are due the artist, or do they prohibit that?
I think I know the answer to that question. I'm looking at Colin because I know that this is an issue that we get asked about a lot with these third parties. But on the artist share, it's important to stress that that is the artist's money, that necessarily Sound Exchange doesn't recognize a lot of those sales when that goes forward. But I'll let Colin elaborate because I know that some of these have crossed his desk in the last year or so.
Yeah, I mean, it's Linda's got it. So like this letter of direction for producers is one of basically 1 or 2 exceptions that we'll make from our general policy of not sending artist money to anyone other than the artist. So if an artist shares their royalty stream, sells their royalty stream to someone else, we will not implement that. It's up to the artist to take care of that. And I'm aware of things happening in the marketplace where artists and third parties will set up accounts, and the artist will be on the account.
But
and
the money gets, they have a signatory.
the money, they have a signatory, and from our perspective, the money is payable to the artist.
I got you. Now, if in fact that happens, and let's say that entity, that record label or whoever is buying those rights says, you know what, screw the producers, we're not going to allow this to happen anymore. Can they rescind?
The LOD?
Yeah.
No, it would be the artist. who
So
would have that
but
power.
if they had a letter of direction from the artist rescinding it?
Oh, I mean, basically, it's a way of saying, can the label direct the artist to
or
rescind
whoever the
LOD?
aggregator is.
Yeah,
It
whoever
doesn't-
that is.
You know, so, I mean, these are issues that you're all gonna have to be dealing with,
Yeah.
and they are significant because many people are doing this right now.
Right.
Yes. We are aware, we've seen some of these come across our desk, but that is a pretty hard and fast rule. And even the letter of direction is a pretty hard and fast rule. I mean, I'm sure you get calls, I get calls all the time, you know, can I do a letter of direction to my son or my, you know, ex-husband, and the answer is no. It has to be a creative participant that we will recognize a letter of direction to. And that includes, you know, labels and third parties as well. Yeah. Yes.
For foreign artists that may not be directly set up with Sound Exchange, but receive royalty, like U.S. royalties through, you know, some other neighboring rights society, what is the best way for us representing a producer to make sure that they can get that LOD in place, like other than just recommending that the artist, you know, remove those U.S. rights from whatever neighboring rights society they're with and register directly with Sound Exchange? Is there another way to go about that?
I think that you pretty much you answered half of the question. Is you can, I'll let Taylor take that, but they can kind of remove the U.S. rights and have them paid through Sound Exchange, and the letter of direction would apply to that. But do you want to speak more on the CMO question?
Sure, yes. So currently, if we're paying U.S. sourced royalties to a foreign CMO, we would recognize that as you know, the artist not being directly registered with us, and we wouldn't process or honor a letter of direction to divert a portion to a producer if the artist isn't registered directly. But if the artist were to ever register with Sound Exchange directly and maybe modify any of the territories Sound Exchange would be collecting, then we would have a directly registered account for the artist, and at that point we could apply the letter of direction.
That's a really good question. Yeah.
Just to add, you could also talk to the CMO and see if they'll honor the letter of direction. And if they won't, they may have special rules for producers, and you should know what those are as well. And like, so PPL, which is our equivalent in the UK, they have a special, they treat producers like contributors to the recordings, and so they may be entitled to share in the royalty stream through their rules.
If
Yes.
An artist basically signs with a producer giving them a, let's say, a limited power of attorney to execute an LOD on their behalf, and that making that power of attorney irrevocable, will you acknowledge that?
I think so, right, Colin? If they've got the power of attorney to sign on behalf of the artist.
So we've got a, trying to think through the way our rules work. So we've got the LOD has to be signed by the artist or the authorized representative.
Right.
And we have a form, we have a Sound Exchange form, oh, thank you. We have a Sound Exchange form that the artist can use to designate a third party to be their authorized representative. It would not normally be the producer, it would be their business manager or someone like that. I'm actually not sure if we would accept something executed pursuant to another letter, through another power of attorney, but we'll look into that.
If we had it as an exhibit attached to it, referencing it.
Well, I can give you the short answer right now is no, because I was
Correct.
trying to do that with a couple of my artists, and I couldn't as authorized user and the producer.
Because you
even
have the
though
power of
they-
attorney for the producer.
Right,
Right.
but the artist had designated me as authorized user or the authorized representative, but then I couldn't direct. I couldn't complete the letter of direction for the artist, even though. So that's a gray area. That's one of the questions I had, because so often the artist is like, okay, that's great. I don't want to deal with it. You just, here you go, you just go do all that, and just let me know. And there are many that, and also in many cases, the artist is the producer and is the songwriter and is the rights owner, especially in EDM and as we move along, that there is one entity that is doing all of that.
Sure.
That's probably another thing I like to mention too is some folks get confused that the letter of direction can somehow be used to change the featured artist percentages, whereas that creates a lot of confusion when we receive the letter of direction. The letter of direction is specifically to divert a portion of the artist share to a producer, mixer, engineer. So if there's any time a featured artist share needs to be modified, the best form to do that and to communicate that to us would actually be our repertoire submission form, which can also be found on the website through Sound Exchange Direct.
Right, and you'll see that. I mean, you'll see that in kind of the metadata sometimes too. You know, you'll see like, you know, Bruno Mars featuring, and then, you know, Mark Ronson as the producer. I mean, there's definitely producers that have tried to figure out ways to do what he was talking about, but the letter of direction is strictly to divert artist shares to producers. You guys have good questions. You've covered a lot of what we wanted to get to. We talked a little bit about how the tax information is going to change. These are just our basic principles. We're trying to make this as easy as possible. Like I said, it's not easy. It's the music industry, and it has grown up with a lot of arcane procedures over the years that are getting better and easier, and give us another 10 years and some modernization of the music, and we'll get there. But we're trying to make the road as seamless as possible, and that's really why we're here today. We wanted to just make ourselves available from our key departments to show you, you know, how to direct your questions if they come up, and how we're trying to adapt to the new world in the business sense, and also if legislation helps us do that, that's great too. But Sound Exchange was really already making a lot of these strides to simplify these processes, you know, before the MMA became law, and now we have a really good reason to do so because it's federal law. And we'll keep in touch. Obviously, we want to do more of these road shows. If you have folks that you think should have been here or that you know, are in other cities, let us know. We are putting this on the table for the next year, so we really want to keep the dialogue going. Taylor and I both have our business cards. We'll certainly make sure everybody has them before we leave today in case there are follow-up or specific questions. And like I said, I'll offer again, you know, on behalf of my department in industry relations and account services, to the extent, you know, we can come in and help you with Sound Exchange Direct or my catalog or getting some of these things done. We're always happy to come in and meet with all your folks, particularly the ones that are kind of doing the day-to-day, because that's where the bulk of the work comes from. Anything you want to add, Taylor?
Yeah, just one more thing. Sure. As the tax changes will be happening related to letters of direction, I've heard that around next summer we'll be doing an email campaign to reach out to producers, mixers, and engineers to offer reduced withholding down to 0% with a W-9 form if preferred. So just be on the lookout for a message about that probably around next summer.
Because the default will be to withhold if we don't hear from folks, right?
Right. The default, in the absence of a W-9 form with a tax ID, would be to withhold 24%. So if that's not preferred, we'll be sending out a notification to say, here's a W-9 form. If you'd like to reduce your withholding to 0%, please fill out this form.
So that's definitely something, you know, new in the next year. The tax changes will happen in 2020. The pre-95 pieces that we were talking about are effective today. So if you start that 4-month process today, you know, conceivably that could be worked out, you know, over the next year. So the MMA really kind of put some good constructs there to help with that. Alicia, anything you want to add from the Recording Academy
Me
side?
too, and we'll be following it the same on the Academy side in regard to these type of meetings and conversations. We're very much aware that that's going to be the next steps with the MMA passing. What's next? What to expect, making everyone feel prepared. So, yeah, we thank you guys so much.
And if there's other issues, like the metadata one is certainly one we're aware of. Sound Exchange is keenly aware that terrestrial radio is still not paying on those rights, so that's one that we're keeping our eyes on. So there's still work to do moving forward, but not to take away from the immense hurdle that the MMA was for this past year. We're really very pleased that this is now law, and unanimously so, which is kind of unusual in Washington these days. So it was really a great honor to work with the Recording Academy and the tech industry and the publishers and the songwriters and the labels, and we all, in concert held hands, and it was really quite an honor. Anybody else have any other questions or anything to add? Richard, Colin, anybody? Well, we'll be available for questions here, which I think is just the last slide if you have any questions. Marshall, I'm all yours, whatever you got.
Give an endorsement. If you're a young producer and you're not set up on this, you should get set up on it. I thought it was a huge pain in the ass when I first started doing it 15 years ago, and it has been, I was never a record producer in the windfall days of you'd sell 2 million records and get a giant royalty check. Sound Exchange has managed to sustain me and allow me to keep doing it. So, thank you. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank all of you for coming, and it was a pleasure to meet everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.